Welcome to Fear and Greed, the Sunday edition. It's the 7th of November 2021 and I'm Sean Aylmer. This is our Sunday show where we have a bit of a change of pace and we look at some of our favourite stories from throughout the week. As always, I'm joined by the Fear and Greed team, otherwise known as Fear and Greeders. Adamski, Adam Lang, good morning.
Good morning, Sean.
Mickey T, a.k.a. Michael Thompson, good morning.
Hello, Sean. I don't know when we became known as Fear and Greeders, but I quite like that.
Wasn't it the Googlers, that movie, and people who joined Google called themselves the Googlers or something?
You know, I think this comes down to I don't know whether you can give yourself a nickname. And so if we have bestowed this name upon ourselves, I don't think that's allowed.
Mickey T, I agree. Adamski, do you agree?
I do.
Thanks. I just wanted to get your nicknames out there, that's all.
Thanks.
Any audience feedback this morning or this week, Michael?
Yes, we do actually have a very nice review that's come in on Apple Podcasts, which is fantastic to get them on there, especially when it's accompanied with a 5-star rating. So Dan says Fear and Greed is his daily go-to. He says, I've only recently discovered this podcast. It is short, sharp, and concise. Just pausing there for Adam to consider whether that applies to him. It is also extremely informative and often funny. Though, when I was looking at the reviews we received this week, you know what occurred to me? We recently talked about Brianna. Do you remember Brianna?
Yes.
Brianna was a listener. Yeah, who contacted us via LinkedIn, and she said her favourite was Adam and his very detailed analysis.
Yeah. Well, we all remember that Adam has been talking about this for about 2 weeks now.
Well, Brianna has gone to ground. Nothing. There's been no word, no praise. So, Adam, I can only assume that you have disappointed her with a lack of detail and too few spreadsheets.
Okay, I'll see what I can do in today's show.
We need a safe word, of course. I have one. Can I start?
This is the safe word, Sean. If the topic gets a little too confronting, or if the attacks get a little too personal, what are you going to suggest?
I'm going to suggest Bob Geldof.
Okay. Why?
The reason I suggest Bob Geldof is it's been a very big week with the climate change conference in Glasgow. And at one point during the week, one of you made the comment the world's changed when influencers like Leonardo DiCaprio and Cher and Pitbull and Cyndi Lauper, not Lauper, Adam.
Thank you.
Are using their social media accounts to create noise. And I think it was you, Michael, that said we used to have massive concerts to raise awareness. And of course, the topic of Bob Geldof came up. But we were in this slightly difficult position of not quite knowing what Sir Bob was up to now, if anything, shall we say. And it made me think, when you're talking to friends, and particularly school friends, and you want to ask how their parents are, but I haven't been at school for 30 years plus, I'm just not sure whether their parents are still there. And it's that really awkward situation. It's, how's your mum, dad, siblings? You don't like to actually come out and say it. And this is what happened with us at Bob Geldof. None of us really were quite sure whether Sir Bob was still with us.
I love that you're tiptoeing around this. Sean, you straight up killed off Sir Bob Geldof and assumed that he had in fact died some time ago because you hadn't seen him. It's a logical assumption. Haven't seen him, must be dead.
We were both sure he was alive. But that shocked you, Sean.
I was surprised he was alive, to be honest. And I felt bad ever since. And haven't you put yourselves in that situation where you've asked about someone and they've just said, I'm sorry, they've passed away, and you feel, or is that just me?
Sean, isn't there another time similar? Didn't you bump into great pool player Eddie Charlton once?
Oh, dear. Adam, we can't say this on Bob Geldof. I'm going to tell it anyway. I did run into Eddie Charlton many years ago. He was a great pool player, and he used to be on a Friday night, and he used to play...
Pot Black Master.
Pot Black, that's it. Anyway, he was, at the time, you could hire Eddie for corporate events to play pool against people. And I sidled up to Eddie and I just quietly said, Eddie, thinking I was very funny, clearly I wasn't, how's Whispering Ted Lowe? Now, for those of you who don't know who Whispering Ted Lowe is, he was the voice of Pot Black. And he always spoke in hushed tones about Eddie going for the black, that sort of thing. So I said, Eddie, how's Whispering Ted Lowe? And Eddie, without moving, just said, he's dead.
That's awkward.
I just walked away defeated.
Just melted into the crowd, did you? Just disappeared.
Right, let's get on to something more serious. We're going to go with Bob as our safe word for the week, since you two have come up with nothing. Adam.
Yes.
Let's see if we can satisfy Brianna by getting into a little bit of detail. I'm going to guess that you want to talk about COP26.
Well, I do, but can I go with another topic first? And I know this is a little bit self-reflective, and it's about our newsletter. But as you both have very happily informed our audience from time to time, Spreadsheets and I have a working relationship. And one of them is the information that we put at the top of the newsletter each morning around the market results. And so as I was doing them this week and including on Friday, I was just looking at, okay, so here's the market results for the S&P ASX 200, 7,428 points as it closed on Thursday, plus 0.5% overnight. And then I look at the column that's plus 1 year or over 1 year, and it's plus 21%. And as I go through the whole column of year-on-year results, all of them are remarkable. So you've got Bitcoin up over 300%, coal up 126%. Gold is probably really interesting in this, minus 8%, but everything else is up. Oil is up nearly 100%. And it just seems to me that such a rare time that you'll look and go, it's been year-on-year results where there's been that much volatility. It is incredible to me. But Sean, how are you seeing it? You've got great depth of experience in this field, much more than me. How are you seeing it?
I think when you're coming out of pandemic, it's probably not that surprising. If you were in March or April last year, everything would have been negative by an incredible amount. And so I suppose November last year, though, Adam, we were coming out, but we weren't the economy was nowhere near like we are now. Remember, November last year, we were talking about fiscal cliffs and government taking away subsidies and, everything going disastrously.
Yeah, end of JobKeeper.
Yeah. So, to see equities doing well, to see oil prices and energy prices doing well, to see Bitcoin doing well, probably that's it's not surprising it's doing well. Just how well is what's quite incredible, and I think that's your point, is that they have risen by so much. I mean, many, many companies on the exchange, I think, of the top 200, I've got this about right, the median, so, the 100th best performer of the top 200 is up about 25% or something or other, which is quite phenomenal in 12 months. If you can get 25% growth in a stock in 4 to 5 years, you're happy. So in that sense, the size of the jumps, I think, have been quite remarkable. As you said, gold's gone backwards. We don't kind of need that safe haven commodity. People don't want to invest in safe haven commodities as much as they did then, and that's what that's about. The Aussie dollar is probably off just a little. Well, it's probably flat, actually. Flat to off just a little bit in that time as well. But yeah, you're right. I mean, remarkably large moves in markets.
So you're looking at, plus 20% or 25% in the median you just mentioned. That's slightly ahead of property, in the country, which is also on an incredible run.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, Sydney prices, I think, are high 20s. Melbourne are sort of high teens. This is over the last 12 months. Across the board, it's about 22%. It's a really interesting, we talk so much about how hot the property market is, but as you say, Adam, equities have done equally as well.
Yeah, so property never went backwards through this period. So that's kind of growth on growth. Michael, the equities, however, are growth, some recovery and some beyond that. How are you seeing it?
Well, the funny thing is, Adam, I'm actually drawn to another column in your daily spreadsheet that appears in our newsletter, and it is the Bitcoin column.
Surprise, yes. Surprise.
Well, I'm the voice of the people. The people want to hear about Bitcoin, and the fact that change over 1 year has been 302%. It's just extraordinary. It is just extraordinary.
So, and massive week for Bitcoin too, Michael, with the Commonwealth Bank decision.
Yeah, it does tend to give it the fact that cryptocurrency will now be essentially available through Commonwealth Bank apps really does lend a bit of legitimacy to it in a way that no one else has really been able to do up to this point. So I think for the doubters, and I'm among those, maybe it's time to start reconsidering my position on that. I still don't know enough to actually be able to comfortably invest in it, but the fact that Commonwealth Bank is now on board maybe means that it's time to have a bit more of a closer look.
Yeah, I'm not going to invest in it, but the fact that the Commonwealth Bank is making it available on their app means that I now believe it's here for good. Okay, now we've been pretty serious so far, Michael. I know you're worried about the Great Resignation, whether there is such a thing. First, you'll have to explain what the Great Resignation is to those out there who don't know about it.
Well, there has been so many headlines about this in the last couple of weeks, and it's always capitalized. The Great Resignation is TGR, all caps, as though it is the next big thing that's happening here. So it's basically come out of the US. It's this idea that people are resigning en masse, and really in the US, it does appear that is happening. That there was a piece in the Harvard Business Review that said resignation rates are highest now among mid-career employees. There's been an increase of more than 20% in the last year on people resigning. A couple of reasons for it are basically that people are reassessing their life and their career post-COVID. They've kind of been through lockdowns. They've kind of been, I suppose, confronted by their own mortality and deciding whether or not they want to stay in the job that they've had. There is more demand as well then for these mid-level employees, particularly when there is a lot of remote work now involved, which means that companies don't necessarily want to be hiring entry-level workers because they're harder to train remotely. So this is what's happening in the United States in tech and in healthcare particularly. But for weeks, there's been the suggestion that the same thing is happening in Australia. There's data that suggests the opposite, that in recent months, the opposite's happened. Fewer people have been leaving their jobs, partly over concerns for say, kind of job security and the ability to perhaps find a new job in lockdown. That might be contributing to it. But then on the other hand, and this just shows how much I'm flip-flopping on this one, I actually don't know what the answer is. We've got stories through the week like the 20% pay rises that are being offered to lawyers, marketing executives, accountants, construction managers, so across a whole stack of different sectors, that these incentives are being offered to try and lure people in. That makes me think, well, maybe we are heading to a more competitive market for kind of mid and senior level workers that will then in turn prompt a surge in resignation. So maybe the Great Resignation is actually coming for Australia.
Two broad things in Australia. The participation rate's about 65%. That still leaves a lot of people who can work to join the workforce. The second thing is, I think there's opportunity in this. I don't think turnover in employment is a bad thing, in the sense that the Great Resignation probably doesn't mean people are resigning to become unemployed. It probably means they're resigning to do something else. And so within that turnover, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for people who are thinking, oh, maybe I'll give something else a go. I guess the traditional model of one employer for life or work for yourself for life, I think this could be an indication that people are going to explore a bit of both and more often.
Yeah, I think COVID will be a turning point in labour mobility across not just the Australian economy, but the global economy. I have friends who are now working for US-based companies in Australia, and that's okay to do that. I think the tech companies particularly, you can live anywhere and work for the tech companies. I'm not sure about the Great Resignation. I don't think you've got 40% of the workforce, as some of the data suggests, resigning. I think you've got a bunch of people who are either getting sacked or actually aren't going to the office because they've got no work to do. But I definitely think the whole idea that people are reassessing and prepared to quit a job and find something else when, as you mentioned, Michael, there is such a high demand for that mid-level management. So I think COVID really will mark a total change in the way the workforce operates.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree.
Okay. I want to talk about whether tech stocks, the end is near for tech stocks. Am I allowed to go ahead?
No, that's a bold one.
Is the age of big tech over?
No.
Where this is coming from, and it's
Adam has already delivered the judgment. You may stop there, Sean.
next topic. Right. Microsoft this week became the biggest company in the world that overtook Apple, both worth around $2.5 trillion US. At the same time, a guy called Chris Lees, who's a fund manager for J.L. Hambro, that's owned by Pendle. So Chris Lees lives in Switzerland, and he was quoted in the Financial Review this year, and I've heard him say this before, that every 10 years or so, the flavour of the decade changes when it comes to equities. So in the 80s, everything was Japan. If you're a global investor, you had to buy Japan. In the 90s, it was the early tech giants like Dell and Cisco. In the noughties, it was commodities, emerging markets. Everyone was playing into those. And certainly over the last decade, or since the global financial crisis, really, it's been the FANG stocks, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. However, tech stocks are really, really expensive at the moment. Really expensive. Ever since the global financial crisis, growth stocks, so they're the stocks that just continually grow as opposed to provide big dividends. The value stocks are the other option. These growth stocks like tech companies have done really well, and that's because interest rates have been falling. But interest rates can't fall anymore, and they're going to rise in coming months and years. I reckon the best of the tech boom is over. I reckon that tech stocks are overpriced, and I reckon the world will shift away from the FANGs. We can't call them FANGs anymore, can we? Because, of course, Facebook is now Meta. Was that a Mang or something or other? I think the Mangs, we're moving away from the Mangs, and we are not a financial advice podcast, I better tell you that as well. I just think that the best is over. What do you reckon, Adamski?
Look, certainly there are some that are overvalued, and look, to your point, that will probably unwind over the medium term, but the technology, I think it's just going to get filled by other things in that space. So I think big tech, like the traditional ones that as we've come to know them in recent times, Facebook, Meta, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, they are definitely highly priced, but I just think that others will come to take its place. And you look at even Australian success stories such as Canva, and that's certainly got into that realm, or even Afterpay. It just keeps reinventing itself and in different ways. So I think the industry of technology, if I can put it that way, it's got a long way to run, hopefully too.
But I suppose the point being that those five big companies have just dominated the market. But I reckon their time is over. So it may be replaced by other tech companies, I agree, or cybersecurity companies or health tech companies or something like that.
Yeah.
But I just reckon that the time of those is over. And this is what the Christopher Lees from J.L. Hambro reckons.
Those companies, they're not that old, and yet they have become the biggest in the world.
Yeah.
So it's an incredible evolution. It is natural to see some turnover in that space.
Yeah, I suppose that's right. Now, Michael, you've been very amused, I think is probably the best way, about the Morrison v. Macron super title fight this week.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I love politics, but I love it when it goes off script as well, because everything that happens, particularly in Australian politics, always just seems so carefully managed, and our politicians are usually very good at kind of controlling a situation and saying exactly what they want to say and really not letting the story get out of control. This week, we have just seen it entirely out of control, which is not a great thing for Australia, but it is fascinating to watch. And this was really over the Morrison versus Macron. It's a debacle. I think it's probably the best way to.
Doesn't Macron look good? Like his tailored suits, he carries himself so well, Emmanuel Macron. Even his name is kind of beautiful in a funny way.
Have you got a man crush on Emmanuel Macron?
Emmanuel Macron, totally. European leaders generally. I had a woman crush on Angela Merkel, man crush on Emmanuel Macron, absolutely.
Well, you know what I think it is? It's the fact that they are all bilingual or multilingual, and the fact that they all have really cool accents.
Absolutely. And look, I don't think the conversation between Scott Morrison and Emmanuel Macron this week was in French.
No, and perhaps the respect for Scott Morrison would have gone up if we had been able to communicate with Emmanuel Macron in French instead of Macron coming across to our language and sledging the Prime Minister in English, not even in his native tongue.
Well, you know what, Scott Morrison, he wandered over and said, "G'day." That's actually how, speaking the native Australian language, "G'day," he said to Emmanuel Macron was the first word he used.
Oh.
What do you think Emmanuel Macron, maybe Emmanuel Macron came back and went, "G'day," or however he does it.
Oh, goodness me. You know what, though? The thing that really gets me about the whole situation is that somebody in the Prime Minister's office thought that the thing that would show that the Prime Minister can be trusted, that he did not lie to Macron, the way to fix that would be to release private text messages from a private conversation, and that in some way that would demonstrate that we are in fact trustworthy. There is just something that doesn't quite make sense in all of that, and it just I suppose it raises the question of is it ever okay to release a private conversation like that to prove a point, whether it's in politics or whether it's in business? Should private messages remain private?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was quite amazing that those text messages were leaked. I would say, of course, that 24 hours before, the French, Macron or his people, released the contents of the conversation that Emmanuel Macron had with Scott Morrison on the phone. That in itself is a bit unusual too, because most leaders don't talk about their conversations except in very general terms. And so the French had sort of done it. And certainly Macron is no angel here. He's got an election next year. He's playing his electorate as well. But the point about releasing each other's, like, how do they start? How does Macron start? Bonjour, Monsieur Morrison.
Well, I reckon the text messages, they would be full of emojis. Like Macron is there texting and he goes, "What do you think about the submarines?" And then little emoji, submarine emoji, Eiffel Tower, French flag, kind of question mark, croissant. And that, to me, would be the ideal text message conversation between Scott Morrison and Emmanuel Macron.
What would ScoMo come back with? What would the emojis that Scott Morrison has? I mean, he'd have like ears rock.
Well, depends on who you believe. There would be thumbs up, all good, mate.
Adam, jump in. Come on, I'm about to call Bob Geldof here.
So on a diplomatic scale, this was a debacle. And it is so rare, I think, particularly when they're in each other's presence, that you see claws out like this. And it was so spectacularly bad. So no doubt there is measure of responsibility on both sides. But I think Macron comes out on top on this one by a long way. And I think it started with the clearly staged handshake between Morrison and Macron. I think it just looked terrible.
Staged by Morrison, but not by Macron.
And I think there was just no need for this to be done like that. And I think it's a disaster.
Can I tell you the other highlight of the COP26 summit for me? That whole sideshow, that was just it. That was a spectacle. But the other highlight was the shot of the crowd, everybody listening to one of the speakers. And there's Joe Biden sitting in the crowd with his mask on, eyes closed, having a little nap during the most important,
tilting slightly forward,
important summit of the year. But to be fair, he might be getting to that age where you just need to have a little bit of a nap, where you do nod off a bit. I suppose it begs the question: where have you guys fallen asleep?
Well, firstly, that age, Michael, you're not far off it. I reckon you get about 40, and it's like, a 10-minute nap in the middle of a conference or in the middle of a work meeting. That's fine, as far as I'm concerned. I've been in quite a few work meetings with Adamski over many years where I've thought to myself, I can't go to sleep now because Adam's talking, but I wonder who the next speaker is.
Would you like me to Geldof for you, Adam?
No.
Adam and I used to do work at Fairfax, and Adam had a very, very senior position there. He ran the radio stations there.
So did you, Sean.
I had a less senior position, and we'd have these meetings. And Adam and I we've always gotten on very well. I think that's fair to say, Adam. The problem is that we kind of have the same sense of humour. So we'd be in a meeting, and there might be 20 people there, and CEO and CFO, and even board members at times. They'd be talking, and you're in those meetings. I just can't look at Adam. Because if I look at Adam, I'm going to start laughing. So, Adam and I, you'd be there and, always the same person giving the same presentation. And like our eyes would meet. And then the shoulders would start shaking and you'd turn away. You'd think about everything but looking at each other. Sure enough, 3 minutes later, you'd glance across and off you go again. Remember that, Adamski?
So look, I know we're digging a deep hole here, as we were both formerly employed broadly in the same company. But my problem wasn't falling asleep. It was exactly as you say. Sean, you were definitely one. You were for me, the worst. Like it frequently with just a look, I would lose concentration. But there were others, and there were certainly amongst that group, people who, if you think I can punish a spreadsheet, I'm an amateur compared to some.
That's so true, Adam. We're running out of time. Adam, I know just before we go, COP26, you watched it pretty closely, and just some of the things during the week that you have pointed out away from the limelight a little bit, I thought have been really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So one that probably deserves more attention than it got was the Barbados Prime Minister, Mia Mottley.
Well, why wasn't the Barbados Prime Minister getting more attention in Australia?
Hang on, stop. Well, yes, this needs a little bit more attention.
I reckon Scott Morrison would have got a hell of a lot of attention in Barbados, just quietly.
Yeah.
Adam, only you could pick one of the most obscure nations in the world and say this speech needed.
I think it's part of my role is to sift through a great deal of content for the gold, and this is definitely gold.
Yeah, Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados. Take it away.
Yep. So I'm going to include this in the newsletter tomorrow as a link because the speech itself is so impressive, and God, she is impressive. So global average temperatures in 1750, that is pre-industrialisation, were around 13.4 degrees Celsius in a year. NASA's saying they're now around 15, so that's 1.5 degrees higher. So that's the level at which we need to survive. 2 degrees above that, and there'll be death to a number of people in Pacific Island nations. So she got up and spoke from that perspective, and you can imagine they're feeling the very sharp end of this. And just to quote some of it, the pandemic has taught us that national solutions to global problems do not work. Leaders have come to COP26 to save our people and our planet.
Okay, that is pretty important.
Yeah.
So I for one feel bad now for having laughed when you started your story. So I apologise.
Oh no, I don't feel bad about that at all. But obviously, the Prime Minister of Barbados, she has serious credibility because her island is under attack from climate change.
Totally. And so she described it as a fork in the road. So for all the speeches and chat that's going on, she said this is no less significant than that moment that caused the formation of the United Nations after the Second World War in 1945. She said there were 51 countries then committed to maintaining international peace and security, and this is that important. She called it a code red to the G7, a code red to the G20, and a message from Earth to the Council of Parties for those who have eyes to see, ears to listen, and hearts to feel. So that's the end of the quote. But it's just an amazing speech in saying we're not doing enough. And I believe she's right.
Obviously, Mia Mottley from Barbados, well worth listening to. That'll be in the newsletter tomorrow. Is that right?
You bet.
Fantastic. That's about it for the Sunday edition of Fear and Greed. Michael, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Sean.
Same to you, Adamski.
Thank you, Sean.
I'm Sean Aylmer. Have a great day.